I have lived 98 years now, and for the last 50 of them, I have not eaten meat. People ask me about this sometimes, visitors who come to the temple, younger monks who are curious about my practices. They want to know if this is why I have lived so long, if there is some secret in what I have given up. I tell them the truth is simpler and stranger than they imagine. I did not stop eating meat to live longer. I stopped because I could no longer bear the weight of what I was carrying. Let me tell you about the man I was at 48. I was not a monk then. I lived in the city, worked in my father's business, ate well, drank well, believed I was living correctly. My body was strong, my appetite was robust. At meals I would eat chicken, pork, fish, beef. Whatever was served I consumed without thought. This was normal. This was what men did. I remember sitting at dinner tables, meat piled on my plate, talking and laughing, my mouth full. I remember feeling satisfied, heavy, content, in a way I thought was contentment. But there was something else I carried that I did not recognize then, a kind of weight that had nothing to do with my belly. I would finish these meals and feel full, yes, but also somehow more burdened. I told myself this was simply digestion, the natural heaviness after eating. I did not question it. For years I did not question it. One evening I was walking home from a dinner with colleagues. We had eaten much, drunk much, celebrated some business success I can no longer remember. I passed by a small temple I had walked past 1,000 times before. That night, for reasons I cannot explain, I went inside. There was an old monk there, sitting very still in the candlelight. I stood in the doorway, full of food and wine, and watched him. He did not move. He barely seemed to breathe. And I felt suddenly, sharply, the difference between his stillness and my heaviness. I began visiting that temple. Not regularly at first, just sometimes, when the weight I carried seemed particularly difficult. The old monk never said much. He would sit, I would sit near him, and slowly, something in me began to quiet. One day I asked him about his diet. He told me he ate simply, rice, vegetables, tea. No meat for 40 years, he said. I asked him why. He looked at me for a long moment and then said, I found I could not eat the suffering of another being and expect to find peace in my own heart. This statement sat in me like a stone in still water. I did not understand it at first. I thought about it for weeks. I kept eating as I always had, but now each time I put meat in my mouth, I thought about what he had said. I began to notice things I had trained myself not to notice. The fact that what I was eating had been alive, had felt, had wanted to continue living, just as I did. I had known this, of course, in an abstract way. Everyone knows this. But I had never let myself truly know it. I started to remember things from childhood. A chicken my mother kept that I had named, the way it would run to me, how it seemed to recognize me. One day it was gone, and that evening we ate chicken for dinner. I was perhaps 6 years old. I asked my mother if it was my chicken we were eating. She told me not to think about such things. So I learned not to think about such things. For 42 years I did not think about such things. But now, sitting with the old monk in that temple, I could no longer keep these thoughts away. I began to see that every piece of meat on my plate represented a choice I had made to participate in a kind of violence, however distant, however normal, however necessary it seemed. I'm not speaking of judgment toward others here. I'm speaking of what I saw in myself, a disconnection, a willingness to consume without witnessing, to enjoy the result while hiding from the process. The weight I had been carrying, I began to understand, was this disconnection. It was the effort required to not see, to not feel, to not acknowledge what I knew. Every meal that included meat required me to maintain a kind of numbness. And this numbness, I was learning, had costs that extended far beyond the table. It affected how I moved through the world, how present I could be, how much of life I was willing to truly witness. 50 years ago, I made a decision. It was not dramatic. I simply stopped eating meat. I did not announce it. I did not make it a philosophy or a crusade. I just stopped. And something extraordinary happened. The weight began to lift. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, like fog clearing from a valley. I felt lighter. Not my body, though perhaps my body too. I felt lighter in my heart, in my mind, in my ability to be present with what is. I have watched many people over these years wrestle with questions about food, about diet, about health. They come to me asking if they should stop eating this or start eating that. They want to know the secret to longevity, to vitality, to peace. I tell them what I can, but I know that what I am really trying to say is difficult to hear. It is not about the food itself, though the food matters. It is about whether you are willing to see the connections between your choices and the world those choices create. When I stopped eating meat, I did not just change my diet. I changed my relationship with everything. I began to see how many other places in my life I had maintained the same disconnection, the same willful numbness, how I consumed the labor of others without thought, how I used resources without consideration of their source or their cost, how I moved through the world taking, and never asking what I was taking from, or what was being lost. The practice of not eating meat became for me a kind of meditation. 3 times a day, at every meal, I was reminded to be present, to be conscious, to acknowledge the truth of where my nourishment came from. The vegetables I ate had also been alive in their way, but they had not run from the blade. They had not felt fear. This distinction mattered to me. It still matters to me. I am not saying everyone must make the choice I made. I am saying that we all must make some choice, must decide how conscious we want to be, how much we are willing to witness, how much connection we can bear to maintain. The suffering of the world will continue whether we acknowledge it or not. But our own peace, I have found, depends entirely on our willingness to see what is true and to align our actions with what we see. There is a visitor who comes to the temple sometimes, a young man who struggles with many of the same questions I struggled with. He asks me repeatedly how I have lived so long, what practices I follow, what I eat and don't eat. Last time he came, I made him tea, and we sat together in silence for a while. Then I asked him a question. I said, "What are you carrying that you do not need to carry?" He looked confused. I asked him again, more gently, "What weight have you been trained not to feel?" He sat with this question, and I saw something shift in his face. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of recognition. This is all any of us can do. Begin to recognize what we have been taught not to see. Begin to feel what we have been trained not to feel. Begin to choose consciously what we will carry and what we will set down. I stopped eating meat 50 years ago because I wanted to set down a particular weight. I wanted to stop participating in a disconnection that was costing me my peace. I found that when I set down this one thing, other things began to fall away as well. Anger fell away more easily. Restlessness quieted. The endless wanting that had driven so much of my life began to settle. I do not credit all of this to diet alone. But I know that the practice of conscious eating, of refusing to participate in what I could no longer justify, opened something in me, made space for something else, something quieter, something that had been waiting beneath the weight all along. Now I am 98 years old. I eat simply. Rice and vegetables and tea. The same simple foods I have eaten for half a century. My body is old now, as all bodies become old. But I am not heavy. I am not burdened. I have nothing to hide from, nothing I cannot look at directly. This lightness, this freedom to witness life as it is, this is what I found when I stopped eating meat. Not because meat itself is the enemy, but because for me, eating it required a kind of sleep I was no longer willing to maintain. I wanted to wake up, so I set down what was keeping me numb, and I woke up, and I have been awake as much as any person can be ever since.